it's going quiet. It's obviously that moment. 11:02, room goes quiet. I don't think everybody's quiet here yet, but I think given the packed day that we have, maybe we will make a start if everybody's okay with that. So welcome everybody to the first in the series of our seminar series titled "We Need to Talk About This." And the first one is we need to talk about this illusion of separation between us. Curiously titled. It led to some very odd emails which read, "We need to talk about this catering issue. We need to talk about this labels." So it's been quite fun. What I want to do first thing this morning is in this little bit before we start our first panel discussion is first go through a couple of housekeeping things or tips. So just to say, you're here on the 8th floor of this slightly unwieldy building. The lifts are only working in Core A, which is turn right out of the door at that end of the corridor. And rather unhelpfully, if you want to escape, it's level 4 is the button you press. It doesn't really tell you that you get out on the ground floor. So level 4 to escape, to get out. Toilets either end of the corridor here, next to the lift shafts. And that's about it in terms of things to just remind you. I think we're going to be here on the 8th floor all morning anyway. Firstly, just to introduce myself, I'm Claire Robbins and I programme lead the MA Art and Design in Education here. And it's my great pleasure to be hosting this seminar with Kieran Reid from Slade, other faculty in UCL, and my colleague Ali Davey and other contributors who will introduce to you throughout the day. I guess to start, a little bit of backdrop to why we have initiated this seminar series would be helpful. And it grows out of a number of things, a number of incentives really. It grows in part out of some research that I undertook for University of the Arts London a few years ago, which was looking at issues to do with assessment in pre-degree qualifications. Through that research I did a big questionnaire, about 200 respondents from schools, FE and higher education, discussing their experiences of different qualifications in the qualification framework that leads students in a progressive route, or potentially should be able to lead them in a progressive route through schools to potential higher education opportunities. And in that research, some interesting findings emerged, and some really stereotypical findings emerged, things that we've known, all of us that have worked in art and design for years and years and years. In other words, there is a big disparity, a big kind of culture shock often for students as they move from school to foundation or from school to higher education. But in today's increasingly punitive climate, where the arts are really under pressure, and where finance drives education, and where we all find ourselves uber accountable for everything we do, the situation seems even more untenable than it might have done 30 years ago. And so for students looking at wanting to pursue a career in art education, I think we can probably say that the field is pretty uneven at the moment. For some students, the opportunities to traverse through a continuum are really quite brilliant, quite easy, quite well maintained. For others, this continuum through to higher education is getting more and more difficult, more fraught and more blocked by obstacles. And it's really that's given us an incentive to explore more what we can do as educators working in different levels on the qualification framework in terms of joining our thinking up, in terms of improving the provision for young people, and in terms of creating a continuum for creative arts education that maintains those students no matter what background they're from, because I think what's happening at the moment very much, and what we can see in recent research, is that the private sector is doing very well. The private sector is hanging on to its arts education, hanging on to those values, but where the squeeze is on is in the state sector. we can see that really plainly. You know, those academy schools that are getting the creative subject just squeezed out of them completely. And also the regimes that our teachers are having to cope with. Many of you are teachers in secondary schools and FE. And just hearing, as I do, I'm in quite a privileged position in many ways teaching here at the Institute of Education, because I get to meet people from all sorts of phases, interested in art and design education, but not necessarily all from one area. So we have people on our MA course from early years education up to higher education. So you get to kind of hear narratives of what it's like in those phases. And I think that it's secondary school, for me, that seems to be the most pronounced in terms of the challenges it's placing for anybody who wants to do something creative, for anybody who wants to give young people a creative autonomy also within an education framework these days. So these are some of the reasons that kind of motivated us trying to get people together and talk. And I noted when we put our promo material together here, that we've got our logo, a Slade logo, as part of UCL on the top of the paperwork. And of course, you know, that perhaps goes without saying, but I mean, we need to talk about the separation between us. Also refers to faculties between a university, in a university. And Institute of Education joined UCL about 3 years ago now. Prior to that, we'd had very little contact with Slade. Very little contact. And so it's great that we're now slowly building this up and building opportunities to work across faculties here, as much as it's great that we're also trying to build an incentive for more discussion, more dialogue between the different kind of phases of education. I was saying to Ali earlier this morning that I, on the way in, I was kind of thinking about my own position in all of this. And my own attraction to getting involved in research that sits around this phase in education. And I've been writing about this kind of continuum, writing about this phase from schools to higher education for some time. But actually, cycling in this morning, I thought, oh, it comes from much, much earlier than that. It comes from when I was about 18. Because I failed my IFA level at school. And there's a kind of curious tale behind that in some ways. I grew up in a really little village in the country, went to a tiny primary school, and then and at that time there was the 11 plus system. I happened to pass the 11 plus. I went to a grammar school. The grammar school was a kind of amalgam of an old boys' grammar school, a girls' grammar school, which meant we had two art departments, oddly. So we had this one art department ran by this sculptor, who was part of the boys' faculty, and another department run by a painter, a woman who taught just 2D arts, and we had a 2D, 3D kind of split, different buildings. They hardly spoke to each other, they absolutely abhorred each other. And there seemed to be an onus on us to make some kind of decision of who we were going to affiliate with. And of course their whole pedagogic methodology was completely disparate. The teacher in 2D, very, very good book. You know, we did this for ages, doing the still live, directed everything. Everything was taught to the exam. The guy in the sculpture room, well, he did his own work in the art studio. He more or less let us get on with it. You could fault many things about that. For me, though, it was a really enabling and brilliant experience, and I just loved being in that art room, and I spent all my time in it. I absolutely adored it. But when I got to sixth form, he decided that we were going to have a new exam. Instead of doing the straight A level, we were going to do an endorsed sculpture A level. First time it had ever been run, and it crashed big time. The whole lot of us failed. And it's funny kind of thinking back on things like that, you know, which at the time was fairly traumatic. But prior to that, of course, with my portfolio that had helped me to prepare, I got my place at a quite prestigious foundation course in Brighton that took 50 people I didn't even expect to get in. And none of my family were artistic. You know, we probably only had about 7 books on the shelf, and none of them were about art. And so, you know, there was this sort of dualism for me that had opened up right then of thinking, oh, I failed this examination, but they want me here. And teachers at school said, why don't you go back and take that A level? You know you failed it, and you could do it. You know, the reason you failed it was because you weren't prepared properly. You didn't have all that preparation work that you have to go back and do after you've done the final piece. You didn't have all those sketchbooks. You didn't have all the things in place that kind of talk to the exam. So you could pass it. So when I was on my foundation course, I went back and I took that exam in the school. And I think it was at that moment that I thought, this is ludicrous. This is a ludicrous, ludicrous system at the age of 18. I thought, the values that are being kind of promulgated in these two places are so wrong and so at odds with each other that they make young people's trajectories through this continuum of education really, really hard. And I think what's struck me about that moment too was that it wasn't about the people, it wasn't about the teachers, it was about the system. And we all feel ourselves very much currently working in a system that requires, as I said before, for us to be accountable. And this doesn't help. I was reminded of something that Stephen Ball, who's a professor of sociology here, said about himself and his position as an academic. And he wrote, over the last 20 years, I've been reformed and remade as a neoliberal academic. I think of my previous subjectivity as something like a welfare academic. In the process of reform, I've been made productive, responsible, and enterprising. And I think that probably will resonate with quite a few of you in this room. He speaks of systems of performativity, those systems that Lyotard and Foucault recognised 30 years earlier. He speaks of the increasing amount of time that we have to have and spend justifying what it is that we do, so much so that the time to do things seems to get smaller and smaller and smaller. And thinking about Stephen Ball writing this in a paper in 2012 called The Making of the Neoliberal Academic, I also thought of visiting a school in Dagenham when I worked as a PGCE tutor. And it was a favourite school of mine to send PGCE students to. I loved it because I loved the head of art. He was really supportive of the students. He let them do what they wanted to do. He really kind of cherished their subject specialisms and how they might enrich the school curriculum. But going out there, right at the end of my PGCE tutor role, before I started working with the MA and leading the MA, what I saw was my student teacher in a room, 45 minutes for a lesson, which is an unreasonable request in which to teach anyway, but only 45 minutes in which to teach. First 15 minutes went on putting the learning outcomes up on the wall, the aims and objectives of the lesson, getting the students to make sure they knew what they were. 5 minutes, getting materials out. I thought, okay, it's going to start now. But really, what was left is about 7 minutes to do something in, because the plenary had to come after that, in which students recited back what they'd learned in those precious 7 minutes of doing something. So this is a system, I think, that affects us all. From year 8 students in a school in Dagenham to a professor of sociology here at the Institute of Education, we all are working in a very difficult system at the moment, and it seems particularly difficult for those of us who wish to maintain some of the subject-specific pedagogic values that are important and that we've come through and cherished and flourished with. We want to hold on to some of those things, but we don't want to have some nostalgia for a time that is no longer. And I think that's the predicament we're in, and that's the reason we need to come together and talk about some of this. So I'd like to give a really big welcome today, particularly to colleagues from Northumbria and to students from Northumbria who hosted us in November, and to students from Goldsmiths. It's great to see students from parallel courses that are looking at similar issues. And I hope this will be the start of perhaps more connections between our courses. We've got we've got some exciting speakers. We've got Tim at the back who's from Plymouth, and we've got lots of people from different phases in education with lots to offer. Importantly, we want this to be a day of discussion. We go to a lot of conferences. We go to a lot of conferences on education as academics, and Annie and I have been to quite a few, on sort of radical education, on radical alternative pedagogies. And what happens is a bit like what's happening now. Somebody at the front talks to you and you listen. So we want to really break that up today. We want to encourage, we want to capture, we want to hear many more voices in the session today. So we're going to have a lot of opportunities for discussion between people as a part of the proceedings. And so in the spirit of that, we're going to actually start the morning with a panel discussion. And the panel discussion will proceed with sort of 5-minute presentations from Christiana Shepherd, who's a teacher in secondary school, Alan Cusack, who's also a teacher in secondary school, Annie Davey, who's a lecturer here at IOE with me, and Kieran Reid, who's an artist and lecturer at Slade School of Fine Art. So we're going to do 5 minutes each, and then we're going to open out to a bit of a discussion between them that I will chair and ask a few questions, but we have this amazing gizmo here. Don't know where it is. Just there, which we will throw about. So you can put questions to people too. So we'll open that out at the end of the presentations to more questions. Okay. So, great, I think we're going to make a start with our presentations, and do we need to get anything up there?
Well,
can I co-opt? Jenny, can I co-opt you just to press slides forward when somebody signals? Is that all right?
Do I have to do it on here?
Yeah, I'll show you in a second.
You're just going to give me a nod when I have to do it.
Oh, one last thank you. I need to say thank you. I hope this is being recorded. I need to say an official thank you to our new director, Becky Francis, for providing an opportunity for seed funding for this event so we can have some rather nice lunches. Thank you, Becky.
Yeah, I'm ready. So actually my first slide is this one.
Okay, now go this way.
No, I think you just go down to go through. There's only 3 slides.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, I think it's fine. You ready? Yeah.
Okay, so I'm Christiana. I work in the secondary school. I've been teaching for about 12 years now. I love teaching. I love particularly working with teenagers, and always felt that because it's formal kind of compulsory education, it's a great opportunity to engage students in sort of looking at art and creativity really as a kind of broader part of life, not just in terms of the art and design as a subject. So I've always tried to seek opportunities beyond the curriculum. And I started off in a community school, which then really quickly converted to an academy. So when I was reflecting this morning on the challenges that I faced, I just really felt I needed to talk about quite a bleak kind of situation. It's been much discussed, and Claire touched on it this morning, but the slide you see behind me really is kind of a snapshot of what the reality of teaching art and design in those really corporate sort of environments really turns into. So there is a sort of sense of coercion that I feel I've really sort of experienced and gone through, and I'm not sure how aware people really are how that really translates into the curriculum and the opportunities students have. Talking about the sort of opportunities for everyone, or inclusive opportunities, schools like the community school I was part of for a long time, they deal with students from sort of disadvantaged backgrounds and whatever labels you might want to give them, but it really effectively means that those students get a very different experience of education ultimately than people who kind of are educated in a different context. So it's a very reductive view of education that takes over. Also, if you are then working within this context, it's important to remember that schools, subject in schools are not, they're part of a bigger culture. they're part of a much bigger culture, and the sort of reductive regime really creates quite compliant students. So again, you've got this kind of clash with teaching art and design, and also being an artist and wanting to do exciting things, but then you are faced with students who everywhere else are told to be compliant. So teaching risk-taking and the open-ended process of inquiry becomes really quite difficult. And then assessment, all those things you see there, and the kind of veneer of pedagogy, all those things are quite difficult, and assessment is really driving all of this. So 6 weekly assessment cycles are not unheard of, I think. And then assessment translated to data is not unheard of again. So So I guess this kind of clash of assessment in art that's discursive and actually quite intuitive and maybe sympathetic to making art, and how that clashes with the kind of need to capture everything in data and translate it into data, then translate it into a sort of image of school art that is really so far removed from from how I would the kind of art that I'd like to engage in. So I find myself in that system trying to do things against that system, but it's obviously increasingly difficult. So I think what you see here, they're all projects that I've been part of, that I see when I go to other schools. Is not at all unusual, but it's very difficult to see how within that culture you could engage with participatory art or conceptual art and all of those things. And also there's a really complete orchestration of teachers' time. The sort of secondary phase, I think it was touched upon earlier, is particularly instrumentalized, so really it's quite hard to find, to carve out space to do things really differently, even with how to make those kind of human connections to do that. Little acknowledgement of the value of this subject. Even if students go on and have successful career in the arts, and they do. I mean, it's not that they come through this and they don't. They still do, but they don't because of what happens as part of the institution. They do it because people like me and the people I was always lucky to work with, we spent all our time in our own time, after work, Saturdays, holidays, to try and provide that kind of opportunity for them to still be able to have an art education that means they can progress. But it's really a sort of not sustainable situation, because it's really the sort of precarity of this and the exhaustion of that. It can become quite personal. And I don't know how, there's obviously acknowledgement if students go on to Oxford universities or Russell Group universities, but even for us, if they go on to Kingston or they go on to UAL, there is no recognition that that is of any value at all. So, currently then, I find myself in a much happier place, a comprehensive school, where I think there is still room to kind of carve out those opportunities, but I've been there very recently, so I'm still sort of feeling my way, but I think this sort of culture of assessment and the regime of sort of accountability that's driving it is really quite inescapable. So the word mastery, if you work in secondary, you probably have come across it, but this sort of mastery of skills is something that seems to have come from somewhere and is really raining down on people in secondary, and it's something that's cropped up even in this environment. And it's really difficult to sort of, it's a constant balancing act between being efficient and kind of satisfying the demands of measuring mastery and doing all of those things, but still also having a sort of authentic experience for our students. And I think that balancing act is really a sort of daily decision. How far am I prepared to teach such and such, and what else can I do? Where is there space in the sort of curriculum and the school year to do other things? And it's difficult, I think, also to persuade people to come on board, because the level of demoralization, I think, can be quite strong even in communities that are very cohesive. Yeah, and there is still a sense of working together. It's quite hard to know really how to engage, and I think that's maybe how I'm going to leave it. That how do you really initiate a discussion about the value of art and design within secondary? What actually is the point of doing it? What's the purpose of it? And how can you imagine art and design to have a wider scope and a wider sort of aspiration? How can it be more integral to this whole curriculum? How do you push those boundaries? Why is it so boxed in if contemporary art practice is not boxed in at all? It would require for people like me to have a chance to do something that maybe fails, that does not have an outcome. I should have the space to take that risk and say at the end of it, well, actually, that didn't work, but we've learned this. So I'm just going to leave it at that. Thank you, Christine.
Yeah, we have to leave that. It doesn't
Is that
really
okay?
pick up very well. So.
Hello? Okay, so hello, I'm Alan. So I've been teaching art in secondary for 10 years now, and very much aware, oh yeah, that's my slide, of Christiana's points and the obstacles preventing our young people in participating in the arts. And you know, I think at the minute, you know, we're continuously having to sort of defend ourselves, you know, the devaluation of the subject, and you know, people regarding it as a soft option, and EBAC and STEM. There's a huge amount of pressure for our teachers at the minute. But I think the thing that I'd like to sort of specifically address today is like some of the challenges our teachers have in engaging young people in a practice which ultimately has to be assessed against a grading criteria. So a little bit of what Christiana brought up. You know, in this results-driven environment, all that work needs to be assessed. One of my other jobs, as well as a teacher, is I work for an exam board as a GCSE moderator, which is really, really interesting. So I get to go and visit lots of different schools, and I assess the centre's students' work against the marks that they had given them. So it's really, really eye-opening to get to see how a lot of schools tackle this. And I mean, a lot of schools do a really good job of meeting these assessment objectives and, you know, giving their children that authentic artistic experience that Christiana was talking about. But I think, you know, sadly, unfortunately, it's not, you know, it's not the case for a lot of people, and you do see a lot of students engaged in a practice that has a predefined outcome, a predetermined outcome. So it is really worrying, and I think one of the problems is, you know, this whole idea of assessment and standardisation and moderation. I think these assessment objectives can become, well, they very often act as regulatory devices, and it does make it very difficult for teachers to be able to provide an art education that is more attuned to probably higher education and art practice, because they have to work within these parameters. I think, you know, Christiana talked about an open-ended, explorative inquiry that, you know, recognises process over outcome, and, you know, risk-taking and originality. You know, these are we all agree that this is undoubtedly going to prepare our students for progression in the arts and have a more authentic experience in the subject. And it would obviously make it a lot more inclusive, so you don't have that issue with mastery. You know, it is a lot more inclusive sort of space to be in. But I think it's becoming increasingly challenging, particularly in the culture of accountability that Claire was talking about earlier. These assessment objectives must be met. Continuous assessment, tracking of each and every student, and your predetermined target grade for every student, which also has to be met. And these things can be related to your pay progression. It's, you know, it's a really, really difficult thing to have to achieve. It's interesting to support, and one of the things I want to look at today, or talk about today, is to support teachers with moderation. A lot of exam boards provide exemplar material, so you will know what an A-star work looks like, and you will know what a C looks like, which in its very self is quite a difficult, you know, troublesome sort of idea. But a lot of people use this as a reference, you know, and it's actually used in training for moderators as well. But this exemplar material is very prescriptive, and one of the big problems with it is, I mean, if at all, you see very little new media, performance, any contemporary practice, socially engaged work. It isn't there. So the exemplars that are used for both training of people who are delivering moderation, or even just exemplars for teachers to sort of benchmark their work, really is this school art that Christiana mentioned earlier, which I think this is like a bottleneck, I think, and there's a big gap here, and obviously, you know, this influences how a teacher might decide to teach their subject, and it you know, it obviously doesn't reflect what happens in HE. Also, I don't know, I think it could be a little bit more worrying. There's a new specification starting this year, and for the first time, pardon me, there is a requirement for drawing and writing to be produced as evidence for GCSE, which they were very. There is an explanation of it in the specification, and they're very quick to talk about it's drawing for purpose, and it doesn't suggest that you need to have mastery. But I do have a concern about how this will play out in the classroom, because the work will have to be assessed, and it's much easier, I think, to assess that that idea of mastery through drawing. And now if it's a requirement of the curriculum, I think it could be problematic. I've already spoken to some departments they've introduced observational lessons with a real emphasis, observational drawing lessons at Key Stage 3 as a result of this, which I think is also worrying, because I think Key Stage 3 is basically becoming a preparation for the GCSE exam. I know a lot of departments now, even in Year 9, they're using the same language and the level descriptors to prepare them for this exam, this sort of target or results-driven regime. So it makes that continuity really difficult whenever you hit that bottleneck. And I think it's a real challenge for teachers, because obviously, a lot of them really want, to provide this experience for the students, but this is what they're up against. So I think, it's really important that there is this communication between higher education, so that people are aware of these obstacles, because they are there and they are real, and possibly there isn't, it isn't as obvious to some people, just the sort of the steps that you have to take as a teacher to meet those demands. So yeah, I'll leave it there, something to think about.
Yeah.
That's Kieran.
These are sort of things I've been working on in the past, the images, so they're not, just leave it on there, I think they're fine. Okay, you've made me trying to, I've kind of prepared something to say, but then you start hearing what you've both said, and you think, maybe we'll come back to this in, when we speak more freely. But okay, I'm Kieran Reid. I'm the head of undergraduate sculpture, and I'm the director of undergraduate programs and the undergraduate tutor at the Slade School of Fine Art, part of University College London. You kind of throw me quite a lot, actually. So I'm going to go through like 3 examples of things which I think which I've come across as an artist and working in the Slade in the last couple of years. And then I've got some questions as well where I'm sitting from. And I realise that the Slade is a privileged art college in the sense that it's very historic, and there are we have maybe 1,400 portfolios for about 40 places. So our recruitment is very thorough, and we have a lot to choose from. So we do often get some of the best students. So I realise that other HE providers don't have that perhaps same choice. So during the recruitment of the undergraduate students through portfolio inspections and interviews, I've observed and witnessed a continual gradual reduction of quality and overall standard of applicants. I'm concerned for the sector. I'm worried that the arts education currently provided within state-funded school is starving creativity. There are inspirational teachers working beyond the curriculum, and there are standout individual students making high quality, new, exciting and innovative artwork, but finding these individuals is challenging for us and hard to do. On the whole, there is a predominance of two-dimensional artworks, few sculptural portfolios, and even less students working with film, digital and emerging technologies. Students are project-driven, led by their teachers. To emphasise this, often when we meet the students during the interview, both from secondary and further education, they tell us how excited they are when they've just taken on their final major project. It's usually FMP, we get told, and which is in fact still an instrumental project. They're working to a brief. They are working to a set brief, which is called their final major project, and the students have little or no opportunity in creating their own curriculum around that. Recently I met 3 art teachers from the inner London secondary school. They told me and I did this through a mentoring process where they invited me in to talk to them about what they're doing and how they can make improvements. They told me they feel undermined by their colleagues, unsupported by management, and they've been told that they teach a soft subject. They don't know how to persuade the best students to study art, there's no room in the timetables, so the chances for creative, ambitious and abstract thought is not permitted within their current structure. the technical workshop is quite amazing. It's a pretty new school. They have kilns, a laser cutter, 3D printer, a laser scanner, bandsaws. They've got a forge, a furnace. They've got pillar drills, but they're all unused. The majority of them are still wrapped. Okay, they don't have any technical support to help them. Okay, and as the room is underused, they've been asked, should it be put to a better use, a better purpose, and what should we do about it? So, and this is the exact same situation which happened to the music department, and they've turned the recording studio, fully fitted professional recording studio, into a storage cupboard. Further to this, the teachers had no idea where their past students went to. So this is echoing some of the things you're saying, and whether they continue continue studying in the arts. And I know they have, because we have one of their students within the Slade. Whereas in the wall, when you go into the hall, they have this lovely roll of honour on the wall, highlighting the proper subjects that the young people have gone on to. These three teachers all went to art school, and they had all maintained studios when they were first employed and had professional artist CVs, but all said that they slowly gave it up as they didn't have the research time. Whereas in higher education, there are many opportunities for part-time lecturers, artists, academics in employment in HE. This is a standard model, and it seems to work both for the employer and the employee. I'm also currently working on a public art commission with Focal Point Gallery in Southend, and it's part of a Section 106, which is a percentage of arts for the community. So my proposal is to work with the community to co-author a sculpture and for young people within the community who are out of work and education to be taught the skills through mentoring, training and contact with technical skilled workers to actually fabricate the sculpture and deliver a live project. The linchpin in the whole project is the secondary schools, but after 2 years of trying to engage with the art department with the local secondary schools, I have now had to change my plans completely. Multiple projects were proposed, often technical workshops, career development, HE progression talks. I even offered different artists to work with in case it was me was the problem, they didn't like my work. But no, nothing. Everything we offered was free as well. The response from fee-paying schools, however, and primary schools was the exact opposite. The more workshops we held, the greater the interest grew. My disappointment is that I met many of the young people in the school, in the secondary school, in local community groups such as the YMCA and youth club services and things like that, youth services. And we had run basic workshops in these settings, but we didn't have the resources, there's not the facilities to run them properly. And they were really excited by the prospect of a larger project, but it was it stalled at that point. I've got quite a few questions, I'm not maybe they come in a bit, but my questions are, what roles should public sector or public galleries have in delivering art education, from my point of view? Should universities and art colleges be closely collaborating in these programmes? And with the government marginalising the arts, how can we best educate our young people? Can participatory, socially engaged and situated art practice support these aims? And should galleries take more responsibility to work on this type of artwork and support research in these areas, rather than object-based artworks linked to the commercial art world? Sorry, I was going to say, with restrictions on creative learning spaces, increased classroom numbers, there seems to be continued preference towards 2D artworks, and these conditions fortify this preference. This is surprising with digital natives and new technologies. This would enable new modes of making. Does a shift in teaching knowledge need to happen to enable more variety in work produced at school level? Or will this happen in the next 5 to 10 years as this comes up through higher education and training? What can HE do to support this? Can a better knowledge exchange between schools and HE support new modes of working? Or is this not really a problem? And it's somewhere else?
Okay, so I think I'm going to return sort of to some of the things that Claire was talking about in a way at the beginning. And just to give you a sense of my position, most of my career in teaching has been further education in various FE colleges, working mostly with 16 to 19-year-olds, but also on access courses and BTEC, first diploma, national, all these various BTECs, and Access Foundation, that kind of thing. But also my interest in this comes through the PhD that I'm doing here at the moment. And the PhD is very broadly speaking looking at a kind of relationship between a kind of mythology of like an idea of the art school and fine art education within the art school. So the relationship between that and the branding of art education today in higher education. And particularly that mythology I'm kind of rooting in a kind of moment before art colleges, trade schools across the country joined the higher education, the university system. So I'm kind of looking at the 1970s and how certain notions of art education then are kind of co-opted within the branding of art education today. Even more broadly, my question is kind of, who thrives in this condition today, in the conditions within higher education? Who is art education really working for, and who's it not working for? So I'm very interested in this mismatch of values that sort of drive and sustain pedagogies in both school level and higher education. And so we've heard a lot, I think, really clearly about some of these conditions in the school that sort of militate against open-ended practices and very much militate against ways of working, ways of thinking and being that are actually totally normative within higher education. And again, I'm thinking particularly about fine art education here. So actually, oh yes, so sorry, the last one was, it's just a few things I put together in terms of this sort of a mythology of kind of, in part, social mobility within the art school in the 1970s. So it being known as the working class university, or for Michael Craig Martin, a place in which anyone can thrive, and for Beck and Cornford, a place for the malingerers, lateral thinkers, and institutionally maladjusted. So that sort of hovers, I think, somehow like a kind of weird sort of cloud and affects a certain thinking and feeling about what our education is today. So, so these very different values that actually exist within higher education, I think, are really sort of deeply embedded, if we go to the next slide. And they're sort of really prevalent in all sorts of places like bookshops and galleries where you'll come across these kind of books. So Lisa Lefebvre's edited journal on failure. So failure is like a term I think is used a lot within higher education. And then over here, Rebecca Fortnam and Elizabeth Fisher's On Not Knowing How Artists Think. So the notion of not knowing, of ambiguity, of risk-taking, of uncertainty are very deeply embedded with what I think at least we believe we do within higher education. That's what we encourage and we try and foster. And this is a quote taken from a course that I work on. I don't think anyone is here that is in the course that I work on, but so a learning outcome within a fine art course at the University of Westminster, whereby the student is, encouraged and being assessed and graded to embrace a state of positive uncertainty. And again, I'm flagging this up just to show the contrast between what's been presented earlier in terms of the languages and learning outcomes and stuff like that. So, many students I encounter in the university that I've worked in the past, but also I hear this narrative from various lecturers, are very unprepared for these conditions, for these values when they get to higher education, because it's the first time they've encountered them. And I think there's a strong kind of, we could call it a class or a social dimension to this in terms of sort of economics, in terms of who are those students that actually get this straight away, for whom this is just like, yeah, this is fine, they've encountered it at home or through visits to galleries and stuff like that. Where many students, the first time they encounter it is within higher education. And recently I've done some focus groups, go to the next one. So I just pulled up one of many quotes from some interviews, just informal discussions with students where I was asking them about if they could remember what their expectation was of going to study fine art and what they imagined it would be like and how it compared to what they did previously and stuff like this. And this is something that I think is very familiar to Alan and Christiana. So the student says, art wasn't really a thing for most of my education. She studied in an academy school. I didn't have so much art at school, maybe once every week or every 2 weeks. And if you needed extra support for your writing or whatever, it was art lessons they'd take you out on. Then at A-levels, if they think you're going to struggle, they'll put you on vocational courses because they don't want to affect their league tables at A-levels. And so it was seen as a vocational subject that you could do without affecting their league tables, so you couldn't kind of cross over. And it's just one of many. I found it actually a very heartening experience talking to these students, because I realised that actually there was a high level of awareness of the conditions within which they're being educated, and of the teachers' conditions, and even in HE, a high level of awareness of the ways in which lecturers often themselves feel really misrepresented by the university. So this kind of awareness of this problem kind of existing. So just to sort of kind of finish off. So it's not that I'm considering these values of ambiguity, risk and uncertainty as being the problem, because actually I think possibly now more than ever we need to really think about how do we push that more, how do we create situations within the formal sort of education structures in which that's possible. Rather, it's the contradiction that's apparent, and I think this is made really uber apparent actually in the next slide, in this text some of you might be aware of, called Mind the Gap, whereby it talks about pedagogies of ambiguity within higher education art and design subjects, and by Austerlitz et al., and they say pedagogies of ambiguity where skills are not competencies but the ability to operate in the complexities of uncertainty. Great. But such pedagogies support the notion that the student will navigate through the difficulty of ambiguity as a kind of initiation, which he will pass or fail based on a strength of character. You know, the good students will just make it through, and the bad students won't make it through, kind of thing. It's so totally ambiguous, you know, and there's very, I think, insufficient thinking as to what really constitutes this kind of pedagogy we're talking about. And so finally, I guess like in this era of high fees, of a massively diminished welfare state, radically different conditions for art education, design education and practice, this becomes really important to think about in terms of who is being privileged within this system. And I have met many young people who might be doing art at school, and I have got artist parents. It's like, well, I actually do my art at home. I don't take the art at school seriously. I do my art at home because I work for my mum and dad and that kind of thing. They've got this incredible access, and those students, it's a fantastic scenario, as Claire sort of pointed out earlier. So what I'd finish by saying is, you know, what are the possibilities? I think one is possibly something about a need, a responsibility for higher education practitioners to reflect upon their own values, where they come from, when they come from, and to really also think and take on board the kind of pedagogical dimension of what happens. And I think particularly in fine art education, the notion of pedagogy is somewhat kept at a distance quite often, in a very subtle but quite powerful way. And the other thing is something that's been in my head a lot, is the notion of higher education as actually having a relative power, kind of capital in the world that I think, and lecturers in relation to the school teacher. And I think that there's a role or a responsibility perhaps for powerful institutions to be legitimising these subject areas at school level, at the level of kind of senior management. Not just widening participation projects and stuff like that, but actually public-facing, legitimising art and design as a sort of subject area. That's it, I think.
Thank you very much. That's great. Well, thank you, all of you, for those really stimulating presentations. I want to sort of kick off with oh, sorry. Oh, yeah. Can we share this, do you think, in the middle, if we all speak up? Cozy. Getting cozy here. Okay. I wanted to start off with a question really for Christiana and Alan, about whether they could envisage ways in which those colleagues who perhaps occupy slightly safer positions at the moment in other institutions could actually affect the education, the curriculum and the welfare of colleagues in schools. Can you envisage models for that whereby that might happen?
Well, I think that the last point that Anne made, it definitely feels that it is a bit of a one-way street. So our students, they come through, the system they come through, and if they go on to higher education, there is no communication back that the students have arrived there, even in the sort of most basic sort of communication from school to head teacher. So I think when you think about values, there isn't really, not out of any sort of, it's just a lack of understanding that is valuable. I think unless people in higher education actually communicate that back, it would be very hard for us to say, but look, so and so, they have gone to this university and this is what they're doing now, and they've just come back and talked to our students. So on one level, we know what's happening, and students come back, and they've always come back and visited, but the people who should know this, they don't, because they don't know how to put value on it. So I think that would be a very simple, some kind of register, connection, acknowledgement, letter, I don't know, something.
So actually, in a previous school I worked in, there was, like you said, a big poster of students that had gone to fantastic universities, but there wasn't one art university listed on it. All these photographs of them, they all went to Russell Group to do these fantastic courses, but there wasn't one. And I know my students went, to really good art colleges and art universities, but there wasn't one mention of them, which is, incredible, remarkable when you think about it. Also, I think, one of the other things that I found, I don't know, maybe it was just my experience, but in working in a few different schools, it's often a very different climate if there is an arts person in management. And I think that can have a real impact on how it's perceived in the school. And I really experienced this. I've been in schools where I did have a deputy head who was a drama teacher, so whenever opportunities weren't as difficult, there was money for the arts, for exhibitions. All of a sudden, when she left, and there was nobody on that decision-making table, everything just dried up. There was nowhere to go to try to make these things happen. And I think I also think maybe that there's something. When I talk to a lot of my friends and colleagues that are art teachers, I don't think they really want to get into management either, which I think that's almost something to consider. I think you try to maintain an art practice and maybe and a teaching practice at the same time. I think that route to management is maybe not as obvious for an art teacher, and I think that has an effect.
And it's interesting hearing you speak about that, because one of the things we've been thinking about and looking at is this morning is this idea of hierarchy, but of a hierarchy that kind of works in a sort of linear progression somehow. And last night, a lot of us were at a brilliant event that a lot of people here are involved in, which was a launch of schooling and culture. And you'll hear more about that later, but there was a talk about that, and really early on in that talk we got a reminder, because schooling, art and culture revisits a time when local authorities had much more influence, and when there were such possibilities for local authority networking opportunities. So instead of looking at this kind of vertical hierarchy where everybody's looking above to a management structure to a higher authority, there was a sense in which we could be looking in a different direction. We could be looking horizontally to make connections across rather than simply upwards or downwards. That sort of struck me as something really different about what's going on today, but something perhaps that wouldn't be impossible to somehow recapture at some point. I don't know how, but it's interesting to see these ideas emerging of how there's a need. There's definitely a need for people working within institutions like schools where they're often quite isolated. I mean, you think of an art department in a school and it can sometimes be 2 people, in a big school, and it really can be quite limiting and isolating how you might feel, especially with these kind of regimes of accountability above you. But I wondered too about higher education, because we've talked a lot about this kind of accountability in schools, but I wonder, Kieran, if you might say a little bit perhaps about some of the effects of accountabilities and league tables and how they play out in terms of some of the ideas that you want to promote that you find yourself kind of curbed because of those regimes, or because of those ideas of league tables in higher education.
We have so there's every year there's the national student survey, which is a huge survey done by the government, by Ipsos Mori, where they kind of ask our students how well we performed. And so it's kind of like asking a passenger how well the bus has been driven, and that's fine because it's important that you kind of understand that, but also it becomes very, very important, like it becomes something which gets used against us as well. And about even students just turning up and filling in the poll, whether you get 100% of them completing it, becomes quite important. So in some ways it doesn't matter what your scoring is, your colleagues want to make sure all the students are doing it. So when we start looking, and that data goes into this key information set, which students don't look at. The parents kind of look at, but there's a lot of historical names that go about that. So they look at the school name and history of who came out of it. But the key information set within art design, well, all of them look at, it's professionalising our practice. So at the end of it, part of the key information is then looking at 6 months after you graduate, are they in graduate level jobs? So that comes back into, I suppose it comes into student fees, taking on national debt, that the debt is being supported by employability. So now with the TEF, they're going to be tracking our students now up to 40 months. And I think it will go beyond that as well. So they'll be looking at where our young people are coming out of higher education and value for money. So it's a professionalisation of practice. So these ideas of failure and risk and hitting metrics become something which becomes hits you straight away. And then we start looking, when you start bedding down into other league tables, say with like QS, which when they look at so different league tables use different methods. And some of the league tables are using the UCAS entry points as well. So some people can be higher up the table, you have a very flat mark, and the only thing differing from your grade and someone else's might be that they took in students with like 500 UCAS points, whereas say we took in students on an average of 300 UCAS points. So I suppose that's 5 A's or A stars compared to like B, C, C or etc. We have very high entry grades at Slade. We've got A, B, B. However, because we portfolio and interview everyone, we do go to the faculty deans to actually say, look, we know this person's amazing. They haven't done this, but we really want them to be in the Slade. And also, you don't have to have an art A level to get into the Slade as well. So you can have people, parents of artists or designers, kind of going through the other route through. And so we kind of think about them, and then because we're all artists, you're thinking, well, we should ignore them, but you don't, because they're there, and it becomes something that's evident. It gets pushed down, and it's some sort of hoops that we jump through. I think particularly as the TEF becomes more apparent, and the TEF is a teaching excellence framework, which is kind of another sort of barometer of quality, which is kind of, one is the REF supports research and TEF is teaching, and where we all sit in them is going to be, I hope, it's going to be used to increase student fees. So it's counterintuitive.
So we're all, I mean, in a sense, what we're saying is we're all caught in it in some way or another. This idea that we live in a culture of measurement is all pervasive, really. We're all kind of operating on that regime.
But I think some of the measurement, when we looking down, this sounds ridiculous. When you're looking at A levels and you start seeing those sort of things that have the points of assessment, we don't recognise them. Like the things that they're producing, it's not recognisable for what we're doing in higher education. But then again, from we at Slade, we have no modules, we have no projects. It's a student-led curriculum. We have 40 people in each year, and it's their curriculum. We have 40 different curriculums, and our seminars and our structure rotates around that.
it has to be said you're quite unusual.
We're completely unusual.
I mean, that is very rare. But
we're meant to, that's the thing
Yeah.
we fight for, and
Yeah.
it's like it's really hard to. It's different. It's not easy because it's particularly when other people coming in from other art schools and saying, well, like this modularisation of and that sort of terminology.
But before I pass over to audience to come on some questions, I just want to flip that one back to Alan. Just in terms of structures, how you structure your curriculum, how much assessing you do, how bound you are by particular kind of, institutional or kind of department-based ways of assessing and working with students. I know Alan doesn't mind me saying this or asking him this, but Alan's recently made a move to the private sector. He's working on a PhD and wanted to go part-time. But this really does fit in with a lot of things we're saying. It's really hard to work part-time in a secondary school, to get a job as an art teacher in a secondary school. It's really easy to find a part-time job as an art teacher in a private school. And for years and years you've worked in the state sectors, and like, kind of really tough schools, really interesting projects and everything, as I know that well. But just recently you've moved to the private sector, and I was really interested to hear the differences there, and I wondered if you might say something about that in relation to Kieran's notions of structuring things differently and assessing this regularly.
Sure, yeah. But yeah, so I haven't been there long. I started in January, and it literally, if you want to work part-time, it is so difficult. There's just not very many state school jobs. Well, there was none at the time I was looking, and the school I was in before did not want to support me on a part-time basis, so I had to leave. But it's really, really interesting, and I think, I think even at an early stage, assessment, like we were talking about before, is so demanding in secondary schools. So all the schools I worked in before, you could hardly see the artwork with the amount of assessment going on around the page. If there was something done, there was 3 different coloured pens had to be evident on this page. So you would have a red pen was a teacher's assessment, a green pen was a peer assessment, and a purple pen was, if there was a TA in the room, they would mark. Oh, it's insane! Yeah. So, this was, the work would be plastered on it, and at GCSE level, I was in the school also that because if an inspection happened or somebody came, that you had to be seen to be regularly assessing, and this dialogue going on. So in every GCSE book, there had to be this, and it was bright, luminous yellow, this sticker, to make it, and the idea was that if an inspector came in, that it'd be really obvious that there was assessment going on. And this, it's so formulaic, the children, the young people just know what to say, www.ebi, and it's ridiculous what they write, but they spend more time doing this. You don't know what went well, and even better if. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. It's very very common in secondary schools. So it's interesting, and this has to be done, and it is recorded that you do this. And the move, some of the big changes that I've seen in the private sector, and obviously, it's not really fair to compare a lot of the stuff, but some of the things that I've seen work well, worked well, was, that there is no assessment, there is no target grades, there is no, and we had a quick chat and you were saying that that's because they all get A's, which is an interesting point, but it's a very interesting thing. There is none of that sort of like really prescribed, monitoring and tracking. So there is a freedom, and those young people are in charge of their own assessment. There's no, I don't have to prove that I've done this and done that. So there is all this freedom. It's incredible. And I remember also, if you are when you are observed as a teacher, in the state sector, there's a lot. The thing you have to show is progress. So students have to make progress in that lesson, which can be a very complicated thing to show in secondary school, but you must provide evidence of that. I was observed in Independence, this independent school working at the minute, and they just asked a series of children afterwards what they thought of the lesson. And I was just blown away by this. I had no idea. previously they would look at the book before and they look at the book after the lesson, and they would decide how much progress was done and whether you were a good teacher or a teacher with needs for improvement. So it was, I mean, really, really amazing to be in this space where it's like, where they really look at how the young people experience your lessons or your teaching.
Trust you.
Yeah, I mean,
Trust.
that's what it is
Yeah.
trust, you know. But I think another thing was there, I mean, the reason I took that job was because it was part-time. The department is full of part-time staff because they are all practicing artists, like you were talking about that HE model. And if there's practicing artists teaching art, you know, interesting things happen. And if that artist has time to make their own practice, you know, there's young people are engaged with really interesting stuff. And that department is incredible. Every room there's, you know, really interesting inquiries going on. And it's largely, I think, down to that opportunity. So yeah, there's the comparisons have been really, really interesting actually, and I'm sure there's lots of other stuff to talk about. They're the two big ones that I noticed.
Thank you very much. I think we're going to give you some chance to kind of come in on this now. So anybody like to ask questions to anyone on the panel? Please. We've got some throwy thing that Jenny's going to throw.
Am I going to throw it?
Throw it. So Jess, do you want to just say how it's to do? Yeah.
When you catch the box, you just hold it quite still, just hold it continuing.
Okay. Yeah. Sorry, a question, just more of an observation. I think it's really interesting what you're saying about the restraints, particularly in secondary schools. I teach in a secondary state school, and I think there's always going to be the restraints of the rest of the school and the system there. I actually feel in quite a lucky position because I think within our department there is an incredible amount of freedom within the curriculum, and actually as a secondary school teacher of art you've got to be quite savvy in how you play the game, and if you can do that, I think you can actually have an incredible amount of freedom with how you teach. And because there's a lack of understanding from management level about how things work within the arts, you can sort of play them a little bit as well, and that's quite interesting. I'm in a position in school at the moment where I teach art, but I also have a slightly evil role of looking at progress and data, so I have to do a lot of that more whole school stuff, and it's actually very interesting having a foot in both doors, so to speak. I think what you were saying, Kieran, about the quality of students going into you're experiencing when you're interviewing is really interesting, and I think what we try and do with our A-level students is really, I do think A-level students have that potential for freedom and to drive their own projects and to write their own curriculum brief, and even with the restraints of the assessment grid, which is constantly changing, particularly with specifications changing, I think it is just about teacher savviness and actually being able to work that, and I think you can address some of those things that you're concerned about, but I think teachers have to be involved in moderating. I think they have to understand how that works, and I think they have to get into other schools and understand that in some schools that school art is just such a barrier to all of those things that you're concerned about. So I think you know, for upcoming generation of art teachers it is about savviness, feeding your own practice, but also understanding how to play the game a little bit.
Come in.
I think from our point of view, we quite like young people coming straight from A level because the foundation is so dominating.
But that was sorry.
Because the foundations are so, there's one major foundation provider at the moment who is, and so all the foundations, everything looks the same, big sheets of white paper and little images in the middle. And some of the, so it's kind of like when you start looking at the A-level portfolios and what it links into what we look for in higher education, it's very confusing why we're not lining up with the exams for progression, where you are in other subjects. Like we spend a lot of time unlearning the students and teach them how to become free thinking, and I believe that emancipation can happen earlier, and we should be starting it all a lot earlier, GCSE, A-level, and so it's kind of linking in a way of thinking rather than this sort of metrics. I don't know how to it seems obvious, but I've got an older art teacher who's writing exam papers, and some of the things he was saying, I nearly fell over because it's just not relevant within the contemporary art. It just doesn't. I just don't get it.
I think it's just that space
The thinking as well, because you know that your student needs that time to digest and think and reflect, but that's the system you're battling, time and having to do that. But I think teachers do recognise that that's needed, and that's needed for them to progress at a higher level, and that's the thing you're sort of battling, really.
Well, you can chuck in that direction.
Well,
Keep it low because the ceiling's low.
okay.
I think you asked the question, Kieran, and it is again. I'm an art teacher that teaches in a ruined attic. It's quite literally a ruined attic, which I think is a really good metaphor for where we are. We've all been put up in the attic, and we're occasionally indulged, and as long as our data meets the expectations, we're all right. But I think the question you asked is could higher education do is really crucial, because this problem has been known about for 30 years, that long, and I can't see enough of where higher education has actually got its hands dirty in terms of providing people to help write really progressive curriculums, to try and say that our A-level is different, because A-levels have to be standardised against each other, so therefore whatever the academic making it more rigorous, they need A-levels to be the same, so that some of the students that I've got who want to go and one wants to become a psychologist, she needs an A-level at a grade that's recognised by that. I mean, not everyone goes on to higher education in art, so finding the right compromise where it is can be standardised against different A-levels and keep everyone happy, but embrace that open curriculum. We need people who are going to come and fight for that, because otherwise I go away thinking, yet again, I'm a bit inadequate because I haven't opened up all of my students' minds. And I signed off a group of A-levels literally yesterday, and they finished their exam, and I bought them cake and everything like that. I showed them my portfolio from when I was an A-level student. I showed them what I actually had to do. It rather ages me, this, but it was literally 4 sheets of paper. 4 sheets of paper was my art exam. They have to make these huge sketchbooks. And then when I talk to people in higher education, I said, what do they want? What do they want us to provide? They said, stop providing us with these huge sketchbooks. You know what I mean? And so you kind of think, well, why? Why are we caught in this? And I know it's very accusatory in a collegiate atmosphere, but I think this ball's coming to you.
I'm nicking this. This is an observation, again, thinking about the HE. So I'm reflecting here from Northumbria University, and we've been interviewing January till March, lots of students coming through, the same last year, and the increase of students that we have that don't do a foundation, that come direct from A-level, and just the challenge. In the last couple of years I've been really sensitive to the challenge that they come in September and how ill-equipped they are to deal with the freedom that they suddenly find themselves within. And when they get to an assessment point at Christmas, so they've only had 12 weeks of teaching where they felt really out of their depth. One of my colleagues described it as being in an ice-cold bath, because they were suddenly expected to be independent learners with ownership of their own learning, and they're used to the structure of school or A-level. And I did a little bit of digging back, because at the end of our midpoint assessment in December, we had 27 out of 66 students who we had to put on learning agreements to support them with their work, because they were really floundering. And when I looked at out of that 27 students where they'd come from, most of them were from either BTEC or A-level, and a lot of them were students that actually would sort of suggested, please don't come to us yet, we'd love to have you after you've done a foundation. But they still, because they feel so driven, because of fees, because of all sorts of reasons, to get on the the ladder of HE straight away, they couldn't afford the time to do a foundation, so they kind of pushed themselves through. And if I looked at those stats, actually it was really high. A lot of those students were students that we'd kind of suggested, please don't come just yet, do your foundation first, but because for whatever reason they still came. So there is that significant gap, and then they just find it really hard. Can you pass that right to?
Thanks, Judy. So I'm going to kind of cut our discussion slightly short because I recognise too that we will only have room for 3 or 4 people more to speak, but there's some really interesting points there, and they come right back at higher education too, don't they? Those very points about having students, they're not ready for us, or they need to go away and do something else first. Increasingly, higher education is going to have to look and think, well, how are we going to change? Yeah. What do we need to change? And it's a very real situation, I think, that we're in at the moment. But because we'd like to have everybody get an opportunity to speak to each other about this, we've actually put you into some sort of nominal groups. You don't have to stick to these, but actually what we just thought, if we don't do this, I know which they're going to sit on that table all cosy there and speak to each other, and there'll be another little pocket there. So I have some groupings which will involve a bit of kind of moving around now, which I hope is okay. You don't have to stay in these.
A school that's not another secondary school. I'd like to visit a school that's beyond secondary education. And the answer was, well, actually, we just we're just happy if we finish with a good GCSE or A-level. And I was going, well, but the whole purpose of this is to enable students to progress who want to progress.
So I've written to every single secondary school in London and beyond, and all the schools where students have come to from who have got in the last 5 years, to do a teachers' evening, to talk to them about portfolios and how to get in. We're giving bursaries of train travel, free train travel, with drink and a dinner. I have 6 people.
That's amazing. So how do you make those channels?
If there were more opportunities for collaboration between these levels. So it's just shifting on to thinking about, well, what potential outcomes could there be if there were more or better communication? So sorry to ruin the flow, but you can carry on, but maybe thinking about this a little bit as well.
Yeah, so all those pre-degrees like A degree, BTEC's a pre-degree, so all those qualifications that offer an opportunity if students should wish to take them for progression to higher education in that subject area. So what might be the outcomes if there was a closer knit working between lecturers and teachers in these various levels? What would you personally want or think could be possible as an outcome of that? So it could be all sorts. It could be for you, it could be for your students, but it could be, it doesn't have to be positive, it could be problematic. So, but whatever you think. Okay. To have come out from your discussions on each table. So a couple of minutes just to decide on what you might want to feed back or what you think's kind of interesting. Just one small point is fine for the table, but so that we get a feel for what's been going on, and then we'll break for lunch. So do you want to just say one point that you think's been interesting about your discussion?
This one.
What were we just talking about?
No pressure, James.
So we were talking, we just got talking about the way sort of secondary, mostly secondary art and design, and talking about how really it's sort of taught in a way that doesn't really match what we'd say would maybe come later, and also that isn't really something that we consider to be very good often, because actually it doesn't, I don't know, it just isn't, like it's a big focus on whether how well you can use sort of tone and the formal elements, that kind of language. And then we were just sort of really thinking about why that is, because actually if you really looked at the specification, you probably almost certainly could teach it in the way that feels right, and then it seems so simple, so why don't you? And then there's all of this sort of weird stuff, like it is like a kind of stream, and under the current you get the exemplar material that you're supposed to assess the work on, and you don't want to get it wrong, because if you get it wrong your marks have changed, and then you're in big trouble really, because you've not done your job properly, is all the classic tonal drawing of a cat going into very nice, there's nothing wrong with it, going into some like texture, some fur textures in pastel fur textures in different colours linked to an artist, and then like a really really big kind of impressive painting of a cat's face. That's they're the Excel ones I've been given. So there's I don't know, like on paper, literally on paper, it seems easy, but there's a lot of stuff that makes it unbelievably hard. And the hardest thing is...
You might not have got to the stage of thinking around... So did you get to sort of think about
Yeah, we
how-
started with that, and then we got to this. And then someone put the box in front of me. Sorry, I can't really answer because my head's sort of focusing
Can
on
I ask very quick? I was trying not to be too, but I think there's a massive opportunity in that because one of the arguments that's made in the art school, I should say I'm an associate dean of teaching and learning, Camberwell, Chelsea, Wimbledon College of Art. One of the art school arguments is about that students construct their knowledge. I did also have a little caveat, which is I think we should be careful just talking about art because most of the students who come from these qualifications will go into design. So 2/3 of our students go, so it's art and design. But I do think the idea of constructed knowledge, which is a very popular idea in the arts, or constructivist ideas of education or those kind of ideas, they always miss one thing, which is that that theory relies on the idea that you understand what the person knows already, is the central, most important part of constructivist idea of knowledge. And so, many times we treat students like we don't know anything about them or we don't know what they know. And so we would know what they knew if we spoke more to the people who taught them previously. So I'm thinking just from the student bit, I think it's an incredibly important thing to happen. And it needs to happen more. Thank you.
Can we get on to that table? So I just got just a point that maybe resonated.
Have the magic box.
Yeah, we kind of talked about the disconnect between art foundation courses, A-level, and higher education. And we kind of talked about who has access to critical thinking and freedom within their art practice, and how you have to kind of invest a lot of money and in order to gain that access, and how perhaps through creating a space for dialogue between educators from schools, higher education and art foundations, there might be a space for critical reflection and trying to kind of enable that access to happen during A-levels and GCSEs or earlier still, if possible.
Thank you, it's brilliant. Can you pass to the table behind you so we get a comment from there?
I suppose the key point was that kind of importance of collaboration, and we kind of talked about examples of maybe enhancement activities being like Saturday schools, really good examples where people do come together from, say, HE or from schools. But I suppose that importance of collaboration and things like the national curriculum and how it's so appropriate for different people to come together. So people like the NSEAD or NAFI kind of working together to kind of develop that is crucial. So I suppose the key point was about collaboration, more joined up approaches, and recognising that kind of working outside of the assessment, the freedom that brings, how that kind of builds a more holistic kind of way of thinking. And it's a wider societal kind of issue that we kind of perhaps need to tackle, but obviously we're constrained by.
And that it shouldn't be a sort of add-on, because I think the fact it's Saturday school, it's not embedded in the day-to-day of arts education. It's a great thing, but it's an add-on. It's for those who are able to access it on a Saturday, and actually it should be holistic and embedded and part of the day-to-day of art teaching.
You chuck over here.
Yeah, I need to. My throws a bit.
Okay. One of the things I found interesting, particularly about the Slade School, you're mentioning the comment about how a lot of the outreach programs you have to secondary schools are taken up more by the private sector than they are in the public sector. Is that right?
No, this is a project I'm working on.
Okay.
But yes, I think in bits, yes.
Okay. One of the things I find that in terms of these collaboration opportunities, it would be lots of the schools that I've worked in or that I speak to currently, it's quite difficult to actually really firmly establish these opportunities, because a lot of the programs that we find come up, I find that there's very little understanding from the higher education institutes about the constraints of which we have to work with in the secondary. It might be the fact that we need a 6-week lead time to actually have a trip to organise to go to the opportunity. Or one of the things that breaks my heart continuously with museums and galleries and with tertiary education institutions is that we're invited to come to this programme where our students come out for 2 or 3 days out of normal timetable and go there. And that's just something that within the constraints of a comprehensive school, I just cannot work with. There's no opportunity. However, if starting to sort of understand that maybe the workshops that we can do with these institutions is for them to come in after school and do like a 2-hour workshop over a couple of weeks. Something like that is so feasible and workable, or where there people come in. Yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for that.
I'm too scared to throw. No?
We went very off target slightly. So we were talking a lot about funding, and because we have quite a mixed table, or some teachers, some working in organisations that do kind of more intervention type things. But we definitely recognised the value, and we thought it was quite an exciting idea that we hadn't really thought of, was students meeting students. We thought that was a really interesting idea of undergraduates, graduates going into schools. We thought that was something that would value everybody, especially the students. Yeah, we hadn't really thought of that. Is that okay?
Thank you.
One of the other things that I was just thinking is, we haven't talked about it, so I don't know if you agree, but I just think that the way that we're being assessed, I think higher education needs to be involved in how we're being assessed, because if we don't, otherwise we're on two different things. So
Thank you.
Shall I make the point?
Yeah.
I just wanted to make, we had quite an interesting discussion, again, a really diverse group, and we had discussion about maybe the idea that we could all think about students in the same way as researchers or something. That was quite nice, and some other things that Tim, I think, will talk about later as well in terms of what you're saying about the relationship between all levels. But one of the things I want to say, which I think I've experienced in a positive way, is the college that I am at, the FE college, we've gone from BTEC to all UAL qualifications. And I would say when you have an organisation like UAL as a board who are used to delivering art qualifications, and they rewrite your level 2, your level 1, your level 3 VOC, and then we've been doing FAD for years. That's been an enormously positive shift in terms of the grading demand. So we now have a level 3 that went from 18 units with 3 grading levels and criteria to being graded on your final body of work. So it changes the culture of that arts learning, and that we've got that from level 1 to level 2 through to the level 3 for foundation. And also they ask for a lot of feedback, so we will get emails going, we're going to change the exemplification material, do you think that you could contribute? And they're very good at that. And so I think that's been a positive example of people who are very experienced in arts at HE level writing the qualifications. And as far as I know, most centres now, a lot of FE colleges, are moving over to the UAL quals. I know you probably know more about the technical things, there are problems with the qualification, is it the qualification framework?
Yeah, is it more just that the government as well were convinced that the only way you could really test people was to have a single exam, and they don't trust anything that doesn't have a single exam.
So we might have things change where we submit, like we used to with EdXL, we submit the proposals externally, or things may come. But I do know that UAL, for example, the board are getting ministers into Central St Martin's. They are trying to sustain a dialogue around what a qualification should be, and that is from level 1, level 2 level, and I think that's been very positive for us as a centre.
Yes. Okay, so I just wanted to ask a question. So basically, we're all here because we want things to change. And I'm just thinking, even if we did this thing and we all talk to each other more, like you were saying before, for 30 years this has always been a problem, or this has always been the way it is. But we still have people working in the creative industry, and we still have people having those jobs. So if we did do this and it all matched up more, what would that actually change, like for after university? Would that mean that more people work in the creative industry? Would it mean that we had more artists? That's what I was just thinking when we were talking about all of this, because we're talking about very much like oh, well, when they come into my institution, this happens. But then what happens afterwards? If we do all of this, how will it change anything?
I think we might pass over very quickly to Sarah. She's got her hand up to ask this question. But after that, we're going to break for lunch. So Sarah, and then that is a really good question to take to lunchtime discussion.
Of course, now I feel pressure. No, I was going to say, my hope, I think, would be that through that sort of conversation, it wouldn't. I know, yes, people are working in it anyway, but I hope it would widen the pool of who goes through to work in it. So I think that's what I'd say.